Hello and welcome to the Creativity Conference's official podcast. My name is Aidan Rhode, and in this podcast, I'll be discussing all aspects of creativity with some world-class creative minds who we are lucky enough to have joining us as speakers for the conference. Today, I'm joined by Patrick Cannell, who is an incredible award-winning composer, producer, and musician based in LA. Who delivered a fantastic presentation for us all the way back in the Creativity Conference's first online edition back in January 2021, which I was lucky enough to host and witness. Patrick, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
Aidan, thank you for having me. I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
So very well. it was
Get
it
this on
was
the books. It's your birthday tomorrow, just in
it
case.
is my birthday tomorrow. This is going out far after the fact, but feel free to wish me
Okay,
a
well,
belated birthday in
belated
the
birthday, everybody. Yeah.
past. If you cast your mind all the way back to basically this time last year, your presentations in the conference, how did you find the rest of the conference? Did you manage to attend any other sessions?
Yes, I did. I didn't know what to think, given that it was going to be a Zoom world. I hadn't had
Mm-hmm.
too much experience with, more than maybe 10 people on a Zoom call. And it was pleasantly surprising in how expansive and informative it was. And it's amazing when you're looking at a laptop screen. For most of us, it's a 15-inch MacBook Pro or whatever. And it was, not to sound cheesy, but it was kind of like entering another world. There were however many dozens of people at one point and people chiming in. I thought it was wonderful, and gave me hope not only for Zooms like that in the future, but what it might actually be like in person one day again.
Well, yes. I mean, there's Iceland 2022 on the horizon, which you're hoping to join us in at.
Very much so. August, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
going to be awesome.
cool.
Um, since January 2021, a year ago today, I know that you're working on some fantastic creative projects all day long. What are some of the ones that you're currently working on that you're allowed to talk about that really get you excited to wake up in the morning?
Great question. So the main beast, which has gotten me very enthusiastic since about midsummer 2021, is it's a new series from Dreamworks called Dragons: The Nine Realms, and it's the modern day take on the beloved franchise of Vikings and dragons flying through the air. This one takes place 1,300 years after the events of the movie trilogy. So it's set in modern day, and it's on Hulu and Peacock at the moment. And it's been incredibly exciting and full of all sorts of adventure and emotion, and really I would say, one of the best opportunities somebody in my position could hope for, as far as writing all sorts of different types of music uh, steadily and having it all try to connect together. And it's really been a wonderful journey, wonderful flight.
Yes, and a wonderful beast, as you describe it very aptly.
Indeed, and it is a beast. Yeah, I've learned very quickly that creativity in the form of deadlines that keep coming are intense but healthy, I think, if you're into that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
how does sort of time pressure affect you creatively? Do you find it sort of motivating to get out of any creative ruts or blocks that you're finding because you know that you just have to get it done, or does it sort of create a sort of mental noise that you find inhibiting?
Interestingly worded, Aidan. I would say at times both.
Right.
I've always sort of felt, having scored many commercials over the years, where sometimes you have a deadline in a couple hours or less, or tomorrow or something like that. There is no motivation like, I have to get this done or I'm not getting it done. I think it's one thing to go into a vacuum and what a wonderful thing to go into a vacuum and be an artist and take your time and rethink, rewrite, rework. Uh, that's a wonderful luxury that I think is has its place for certain things. That said, a deadline, I think, for many of us, pulls stuff out of us that maybe we didn't think we had. It's 5 in the morning. I have a deadline in 3 hours. I still got a minute of music to write. I mean, you learn what you're capable of. And the funny thing is that sometimes when you're under pressure like that, your mind just sort of, at least mine, just kind of kicks into this drive, which is like, well, failure is not an option. So
Mm-hmm.
if we need to, I don't want to say dumb it down, but if you need to make this efficient and you need to write 60 seconds of music, 60 seconds of music, depending on what type of music, can take, you know, it's just like sing something that's 60 seconds right now. You'd be surprised. Sometimes you can bang it out. Other times, if you're dealing with orchestral music, it takes some time to do it. So your mind sort of problem solves. And the funny thing about time, I've always said, and I've always been enamored with the enigma that is time. Like, not to get too
Mm-hmm.
deep, but literally, like, what is time? It's crazy. It's I find it's not linear because when you're in the zone, if you're making a film or a painting or writing or making music, it's like, where did those 7 hours just go? Literally 7 hours. It's dark outside now. How did that happen? You know, the sun is coming up now, and I'm still literally in the same spot. I haven't even got up to go pee, and the sun's coming up now. So deadlines, I kind of put that into a strange realm where you're not necessarily in a race, even though it's literally a race, but you get to this point where you, I think, enter a different aspect of creativity, or a different part of the room. Not better or worse, but just different.
Yeah, we've discussed sort of the creative flow state in a few episodes, and everybody encounters them differently. And in a way, what you're saying is that deadlines are kind of, in a way, a hack to enter a flow state when you're sort of, you really have to just get it done, and you're just like, right, I need to get into this state of uber productivity. I just have to get this done. Boom, deadline. Do you think that you could hack that in a way?
I think that's very interesting. Yeah, indeed. You're bypassing whatever to hack into a certain flow state. I think that's exactly what it is. And I've never quite thought of it like that. But yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. And the funny thing is that, with creativity, I think it's one thing to be creative and to just paint, so to speak, and not finish anything. My dad instilled in me years ago, he was like, you got to get it, you got to get it done. I think I also read somewhere Willie Nelson said something like, a song is not a song until it's recorded. I agree with that to a degree. Anything pre 1900 or pre 1870 or whatever the year is with the phonograph, I don't know if you could argue that, but the point is, like, you got to finish it. And what a deadline does is it helps you enter this flow state where you're going to finish that and you're going to print it or you're going to send it off or something. And it might not be the best thing you've ever done, but I've had situations where, were it not for the deadline, I would A, not have written the music at all, probably, and B, probably not have asked myself certain questions that got that music to where it was. And therefore, you could argue that, if you light a fire under your ass, you're going to do a crazy dance maybe you've never done before. And maybe it's going to be a beautiful dance, hopefully. So, yeah, it's time is great. Though sometimes you don't have it and you do what you can with it. So.
Do you think that if it's yourself lighting the fire under yourself and it's a self-inflicted deadline, that it's potentially less motivating than if it's someone else's deadline?
Good question. I I think it depends on your priorities and maybe what
Yeah.
your objective is. I mean, if somebody's paying you, that feels different than if you're just like, I'm not going to give myself these cookies if I, whatever. I know a friend of mine, he would give himself pretty adamant deadlines. And I thought about this myself, where he would post on social media and he'd be like, there's an album coming out in uh, April 22nd or something. And it would be a couple of months before that. So he would give himself that task of this is when it's coming out. There's no record label determining this. It's just me. And I respect and admire that drive and discipline, because I think that's what it is. A deadline, whether it's somebody else's or yours, it's discipline. And, I think what's most fascinating about artists and creativity is it's like, you can be waiting at the beach for your toddler to finish playing in the sand and you can be creative while you're there. Is that to, playing, drawing something in the sand or whatever? Is that to say that that's less important than, some company paying you money to have a deadline to do something and it's going to be this big thing? I don't know. It's creativity is, I think, an interesting concept because we kind of get it. I don't know if mixed up is the word, but I think getting back down to human basics is important there, and making sure that it's not that important. How fortunate we are that we are even creating anything, whether it's dinner or breakfast or some nice smiley face in the sand while a little kid is playing that's going to be washed away in 20 minutes. Or, I'm sort of going on a tangent here, but the deadline of this conversation, Aidan, is giving me all sorts of fires right now.
Yeah, and as you say, being held accountable by others rather than just yourself is far more motivating for a self-inflicted deadline than otherwise.
Yes, and back to that. Perhaps you're the type of person though where you're giving yourself that deadline and that you want to be a person of your word and you want to live up to that. Like I could see that being important in the pressure of other forces, other people, not necessarily people that have anything to do with that deadline. But I think maybe the point here is like when there's a finish line or there's a purpose, there's constraints. You could think of it like weightlifting. You could go to the gym and you can casually lift weights and never try to grow and whatever, just sit there and eat chocolate. Or you can have maybe not a time deadline, but you can have, I'm going to do 10 reps of these. It's going to push it farther. It's kind of like that, I think, in a way where there is an opposing force for the sake of growth.
And a similar kind of idea, as well as time constraints, is budget constraints when it comes to a lot of creative projects. You've obviously worked for some huge companies doing adverts, Google, Ford, the Olympics. Is going from sort of a low budget film and sort of smaller projects to these huge corporate projects with hugely bigger budgets. Do you find that do you have a preference either way from a creative sort of stimulation perspective, or are the two like kind of trying to compare apples and oranges in terms of the budgets involved?
Great question. In my experience, the interesting thing about a budget is that it's not the sword, it's the swordsman. And that's not to pat myself in the back. It's more like, just because you have more money to play with or you have more time doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be better. I think what's funny is that often smaller budget projects have maybe creatively stood out more because you come up with ways to either how do I make this sound like it's costs a lot more, or how do we have fun with it, or how do we take this pencil and this little iPhone recorder and make something cool out of it. Interesting thing about technology now, musically speaking, is that you really don't need all the bells and whistles to do crazy stuff. A lot of the big hits, that are cutting edge all the time are coming from dorm rooms with kids with laptops. As far as budgets go on a larger scale with larger projects, when you have more money at stake, it's been my experience that there's usually more people that chime in, which is to say that if the budget is much larger, that's not necessarily a constraint on the creativity, but sometimes there can be more cooks in the kitchen. Sometimes more is expected. Sometimes it's like, oh, that only took you 20 minutes. Wait. Okay. Let's see what else we can do with that. I think when there's less of a budget, there's less pressure in the sense that we're going to get in trouble if we don't deliver this. I don't know if trouble is the right word, but I think like anything, maybe not anything, but creatively, when there's more money involved, it's funny how the core of maybe what you're trying to do takes a different turn. The pressures that come with it, the additional people involved, even on my end, having a lot more musicians involved. One of the things that's nice about a larger budget is sometimes you can have some things taken off your plate. Like rather than having to do everything, now maybe somebody else can mix the music. We can get somebody who really knows how to play the cello in here rather than me try to mimic it on a keyboard. I love playing guitar, but sometimes it's better to get somebody who only plays guitar to play guitar on your thing, yeah, I could keep going, I guess. But
Well, you've worked on so many different projects of so many different scales, from the big ones as we've mentioned, the Ford, the Toyota ads, the Dreamworks Dragons that you're doing now. But you've also done stuff for like disaster relief benefit stuff in Haiti and Japan, which sound like a very amazing opportunity, which I'd love to talk about more. But of all of the projects that you've worked on, are there any that you have a particular soft spot for, you're particularly proud of, but you find that are potentially underappreciated and deserve a bit more love and that you wish more people knew about?
Great question. Commercials, just like any visual content, I think, especially in this day and age, in the age of streaming, and I'm guilty of this too. I think we all are to a degree. Some of the work that went into the music for that and the creative avenues explored and the collaborations, probably most people don't care about. And frankly, if I were them, I wouldn't either. Just like when I'm watching TV and I'm like, another commercial. Okay, even if it's a fun one, other than the Super Bowl, maybe. I think commercials are easily overlooked. Some films I've done, similar thing. I guess the question is, what now under the question of a score, which is an interesting aspect within music making. It's one thing to make a song. It's one thing to make a hit song that is legendary and people sing it for decades to come. But somebody like John Williams, who's, we could argue, is the master, the living master of our time as far as film scores go, he understands that the purpose of the score is to help tell the story. So you might be particularly proud of the music you're writing and look at all these flute lines I did and everything's so great and the melody's beautiful, but unless it helps tell the story, it's not necessarily an effective score, which is to say that often I think you can be very proud of the scores you do, but they just serve the purpose of not necessarily taking the lead role, which is, I think, an acquired understanding. I think anybody who gets that from the beginning is unique. I certainly was, in my younger years, would love the praise and took a bit of time to understand that sometimes you got to take your foot off the gas. It's not about you. It's about the movie or about the commercial or about the TV show. Um, Alternatively, this dragon show I'm doing is maybe one of the first times where people have actually been reaching out about the score, which is wonderful. When you hear this happened to me a couple of times over the years, but it's such a beloved franchise that people were looking forward to it. There was hype behind it, and for some people who are really enthusiastic, they found me online and reached out and said, "Oh, I love the music," and that's such a joy and such a treat to be reminded that your hard work pays off and that people respond to the story and are touched by it. And honestly, man, dragons flying through the sky. It's like it's a fun way to be creative, you know.
It's a
Um,
great prompt to just go with it and make music for.
it sure is. It's one thing to take a serious drama with real life scenarios. Even that can be fun, and you can be nimble with your creativity. But when you're dealing with creatures that don't exist, and it's our imagination that makes them fly through the air. There's this one scene in the first couple episodes where the main character's falling presumably to his death, and maybe not. It's a kid show, but and this comes from the movies too. This happened in the movies where the main character's falling, and then the dragon goes and saves him. And when you have to prepare to write music for that, it's like it's not a gentle thing, you know. Not to say you get into the depths of your mind, like, oh my God, this guy's gonna die. What is this music like? It's obviously not gonna die, we think, but the stakes are very high, and it's a dragon who cares for this human, and he's flying as fast as he can towards the depths of the earth to save him, and that is a wonderful brief to consider, to think, how are we going to tell this story? How are we going to tell it in a way that's kind of unique and fun? And but uh I won't tell you all what happens, but if you're interested, you can check it out on Hulu and Peacock.
And on the topic of dragons, well, I guess just sort of animals in general, albeit mythological ones. You have previously described yourself as somewhat of a puppy whisperer. Do
Oh,
you find that there's a particularly distinctive or unique element of creativity when you're communicating or training, working with animals in any way?
I've always loved animals, most animals. I had a pretty scary situation over the summer. I think it was 2020, where I was camping with my girlfriend on a remote island in Minnesota, and a bear came. And I won't go deep into the story, but for any of you that have encountered a bear, it really puts your life into perspective, and it summons instincts that you maybe didn't think you had if you were otherwise not in a position out in the wilderness with a bear. As far as puppies go, uh, puppies, I think, and dogs in general, they say sometimes like you're a dog person, you're not a dog person. I've always found that sometimes when I like pay attention to the dog, I think it's easy for people to just treat a dog like a dog. And I'm not trying to say I'm this dog whisperer or whatever, but I don't really look at dogs like dogs all the time. I try to bond with dogs. Whenever I'm at a friend's place and they have a dog, I usually get along with it and we hang out. My mom's dog I'm convinced, is a human in dog form. I mean, he's like 10 now. He's a little guy, like 20 pounds. I'm pretty convinced that he understands every single word that I say. And I've done some tests with him where I just speak plain English and he gets it. Weird things like his name's Monroe. I'm like, Monroe, if you understand what I'm saying here, like look over at the door. And I won't motion at the door and he'll look over at the door. It's weird. So I don't know. I think as far as creativity goes, when it comes to animals and bonding with other souls. I think, again, to go deep here, I think creativity in many ways is about being a soul, being connected to other souls, trying to better the life of other people. I don't think anybody making things has a mission to destroy or a mission to tear down or to hurt. It's all sort of in the kumbaya vibe of we're humans and we're part of a community, and what does it mean to be a homo sapien, and what's our role in that, and how can we add to the mix. Some interesting things I've had with animals, um, especially cats. One time my buddy got a kitten. This was in high school or college. His family got a kitten, and he had a guitar, and I was the only one there that knew how to play the guitar, and I played the guitar for the cat, and like blew his mind. And not to say the guitar playing was mind blowing, but the cat experiencing that for the first time, his mind was blown. He was so interested. He was trying to like climb into the guitar, figure out what was happening. It was really precious, and just goes to show, I think sometimes certain frequencies can affect animals in certain ways. You've probably seen videos of like dogs dancing and dogs howling with their singing humans and all that.
Yeah,
So
and there's an interesting book and movie, if you haven't already heard of it, called A Street Cat Named Bob, which is all about a cat and a musician on the streets of London.
I love that. I have heard of it. I don't know much about it though.
I highly recommend it. I highly recommend it.
That
It's very good. What, other than puppy whispering, what are some other creative outlets outside of your day-to-day job that keep you creatively fulfilled?
I almost became an architect.
Really?
Yeah. And became, meaning I almost pursued it in college. When I saw, I guess I was early teens, and I saw Thomas Jefferson's Monticello in person in Charlottesville, Virginia for the first time. Something about the way that symmetry happened and worked and stood there, simple yet massive. If you're not familiar with the building, it's on the back of it, All American Nichols, the backside of it. Anyway, I was just so taken by this building, and then that kind of snowballed into me looking into other architecture and eventually modern architecture and how rooms work. And so, to answer your question, when not making music, I wouldn't say I'm always thinking about architecture, but a bucket list in my life is definitely to design at least a house. And I maybe before that design a studio. I think what's interesting about humans' ability to do all sorts of things, I think we're the only animals that put sauce on our food. I'm not sure about that, but I think we dress up our food in way maybe birds do to a degree, but we have the luxury and the time and the protective means to do so. And I think the same, I know birds, and for all the nature documentary people out there, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen a couple of documentaries with birds doing some wild things as far as making their nests and attracting mates and stuff like that. But I think a human's ability to festoon shelter can be amazing, because it's been my experience that architecture and the balance of light and shadow really has an effect over your mood. And somebody like me, I spend a lot of time in the studio. You could say it's the hearth of the home around which life evolves, or at least a lot of creativity. So having a studio or a space that feels inspiring and feels good and has cool lighting and maybe some plants, I like that very much. And there's nothing like light, big windows, and I don't have that at the moment in the studio. But as far as buildings in general go and architecture, I think it's a wonderful respite from music. It's music in its own right, I guess.
Yeah. And also great use of the word festoon. That's a
Yeah,
banger of a word. And
it is,
I
isn't it?
appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a great SAT word to try to throw out
Oh
occasionally.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Another SAT word I remember that I rarely use, and maybe you're a little pompous if you say it, but are you familiar with the word perambulate?
I've heard it. I probably couldn't define it.
I'm pretty sure it means to go around the perimeter of something. So like
That
I'm
would
going to
make
walk
sense.
around the garden, I'm going to perambulate the garden.
That's good. I did a practice SAT once, and quixotic was on there, and I was like,
What's
dang. It's like the opposite of pragmatic. It's very dreamy. You're just talking hot air, but there's not actually any tangible anything to your saying. Yeah. It's a good one.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quixotic. Also, isn't the human
loads of points in Scrabble too. Wow.
How do you spell it? Quixotic?
It's Quixotic.
I kind of put you on the spot there unintentionally, but good job.
Thank you.
I think the English language I've read is we have the most words.
We do, by quite some ways.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
Not for non-native speakers, I don't think.
Yeah, that's true.
Does make things tricky. Anyway, before we digress any further into the wonders of the English language, I have one more question for you, which is something I ask every single speaker at the end of every episode. Quite a broad question, easy to ask, maybe tricky to answer concisely at least. But it is, as a creative, what does creativity mean to you?
Like you said, tricky to answer, though I'll try to make it short and sweet. I think it's maybe all too common and cheesy to say creativity is, the extension of yourself and expression of yourself. While it is, I firmly believe that. I think all we can do here is, in our time on this planet and in life, in this soul at least, try to do something that maybe only you can do, that's unique to you. I think creativity is also, can be done in a vacuum, but creativity to me means how can we harness all that I can do and maybe capabilities to collaborate with other people to build a big ass tower. I probably couldn't do that by myself. If we get enough engineers and enough builders and enough visionaries in here, how can we do something even greater? I wouldn't say that's all that creativity means to me, but I'm amazed in our ability to be ant-like, where we can combine forces and build something bigger that we would have otherwise most likely been unable to do on our own. Additionally, creativity means pushing it, testing what you can do, not being comfortable. I think I'm probably similar to many creatives in that rarely when you finish something and maybe you reflect on it, it's just like, oh, nailed it. Next, Sure, sometimes you're like, I think I did a great job on that. Or people are like, we really love what you did. And then you feel good about it. But I think it's not so much self-deprecating as much as it is like, how can I be better than that? How can I keep improving? I think creativity is a means to exercise, to grow, to expand, to go beyond, and inevitably, hopefully, be in a position years down the road where you look back and you're like, God, I knew nothing back then. Look at what I can do now. I mean, look at Picasso. That dude, he was a fine artist, really detailed fine artist in his younger years. And then he went on obviously the wild journey that we know him best for. I think that's an interesting exploration. He didn't necessarily have I don't know enough about him. He didn't necessarily have the thought process, how can I be better? How can I do all that? But I think it's creativity is about the exploratory world. We're all nomadic hunter-gatherers on a journey, and I think that journey is wild and full of ups and downs. And creativity, in many ways, for me, is the almost like the material manifestation of what life is, which is, it sometimes is great, sometimes it's not. Hopefully I'm trying to be a little better today than I was yesterday, in a nutshell, maybe.
Very well put. And with that, that's all we really have time for. Thank you so much for joining me, Patrick. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Aidan.